a warm welcome to all of you and welcome to this seminar which will be on the impact of people and societies, of alcohol on people and societies during and after war. And this seminar is organized by the IOGT-NTO movement's international work together with Nocturum. And Nocturum, they are a think tank that explore, analyze and debate perspectives on the role of alcohol in society. Now, the IOGT-NTO movement, they have been working for many years to try to, as a driving force in raising awareness of how alcohol affects development and recovery in societies. Societies affected by poverty, by war, and by post-conflict situations. And through their collaboration in East Africa, in Southeast Asia, and in Eastern and Central Europe, they have raised the issue internationally and pushed for it to be taken seriously. And in this work, they've drawn attention also to the mental health of boys and men, not least in conflict and post-conflict situations, where many men have experienced things that no human being should have to experience, or been forced to perform acts that are inhuman. And still, in many communities, there are almost no rehabilitation, no psychological support, and very few opportunities to process what they have been through. And when that support is lacking, alcohol and other drugs are often becoming a way out of trying to cope with all the difficulties. And we know that that doesn't help. It only makes the situation worse, both for themselves, for their families, and for the society's ability to recover in a post-conflict situation. And it's precisely this perspective, the importance of providing early support for trauma and to prevent, protect the rights and safety and security of others, not least women and children, that the IOGT-NTO movement and Nocturum wants to highlight here today on this seminar. We have some beautiful illustrations that you can see on our screen, and it comes from this report, and the illustrations are from Anna Sarvia, who is a Ukrainian illustrator. I who welcome you today, my name is Sarah Heine, and I'll be leading you through today's seminar. And I worked with these issues for many years, earlier for the IOGT-NTO movement's international work, but I also had the opportunity to look deeper into this perspective when I wrote the report När man är full är det inte så läskigt att dö. When you're drunk, it's not so scary to die. And the quote, the title of the report, comes from a Russian deserter that explained the high consumption of alcohol among Russian soldiers. And on behalf of Nocturum, I wrote the report last year, which has, and Nocturum, they have highlighted war and conflict as one of their themes the last years, and the connection between war, conflicts, and alcohol consumption. And they have done so partly based on the report I wrote, but also through a new sub-report on colonialism and the role of alcohol historically and today. Now, my own commitment to these issues, grew in the late 1990s when I was working in Sri Lanka for Save the Children. I worked in a project that brought together children from the country's 4 major ethnic groups. And the country was then in the midst of a civil war, and many families had suffered losses through the death of their family members, the loss of their homes, constant fear, poverty, and stress. And it became very clear for me that alcohol was used in many families as a way out, especially for the fathers. It was a way out of stress and poverty for the moment, but also a choice that made it difficult for families to create a change and led to violence to children in their own homes. Now, Sri Lanka is also a clear example of a country where drinking increases in post-conflict situations. A bloody end to the war in 2008 that left deep scars in the country and created a turbulent period. A period of migration and social transformation where people that had been in exile came back to the country again. And also people in the country suffering from trauma and post-traumatic stress in a country that also was in great need of money to be able to rebuild the country after the war. And when you're in a great need of money, you also open up for opportunities, companies from abroad. And they did so, and they opened up for foreign companies and alcohol companies that enter the market without having any regulations or legislations on public health in place. And the increased demand for alcohol in the areas where war was centered, in the northern and the eastern part, doesn't really seem to work. I'll try that as well. See. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks. Start over again. The increased demand for alcohol in this area, where the war was centered in the northern part and the eastern part, led, for example, to Lion Beer increasing their sales by 70% after the war in 2011. And at the same time, a study was conducted among school children in the area that was war affected. And that study showed that 70% of the children were being hit in their home by their own relatives. And in this study, being hit was defined by being hit with an object. So 70% of the children were being hit with objects in their home. And there was a clear dose-response relationship between how much the family's exposure to war experiences, the father's alcohol consumption, and the amount of violence within the family. Now, when I was working on this report, I followed up on studies in different parts of the world, and the pattern from Sri Lanka that sort of reappeared, both historically and in the current situation. And it was not only about the violence itself, but also the number of men suffering from mental health issues and living with difficult experiences that they coped with through alcohol and other drugs. And when support is lacking, it affects the choice of solutions and the possibility to recover, both in communities, among people who are vulnerable, among people who are refugees, among people who come to Sweden. The IOGT-NTO movement is now working on how they can contribute in this setting, mainly in Ukraine, but also in other countries, and with knowledge gained from their cooperation in Bosnia. And today, together with our panel, I'm not covering you anymore now, that feels great, we'll discuss precisely this. What happens when trauma is silenced, how are families affected, and what efforts are needed to break the pattern. And you as an audience, you're more than welcome to put your questions and join the conversation as well. And you do so by scanning our QR code. So let's see if we can get that up. Here we go. Yes. So you can scan the QR code and you're more than welcome to put your questions during the seminar. And with that, joining us today in our panel is Åsa Regnér, Secretary General for Rädda Barnen, Save the Children. Adis Arnautovic, who is the Secretary General for Center of Youth Education, SEM, in Bosnia. And Annette Lyth, who is a lecturer in international law at Försvarshögskolan, the Swedish National Defense University. And you also have many years of experience working for the UN in different parts of the world. And that's an experience you also share with Åsa. But I would like to begin by turning to you, Adis. Now, you work for SEM, which is a youth organization in Bosnia, situated in Travnik, outside of Sarajevo. And there are still a lot of traces from the war in Bosnia, and not least among veterans who are often both honored, but also at the same time have been left without support to deal with the trauma. And that has been the case for many years. How do you think that alcohol consumption linked to the war has affected society in Bosnia, both among veterans, but not least among the families? I mean, you meet youth daily in your work, and how do you see that their lives has been affected by their parents' trauma and violence and alcohol culture? Could you give us a picture?
Yeah, I will try. Good morning to everybody. My answer will be mixed. It will be like in one sense professional from the point where I'm working, but I also have a personal experience because when the war started in Bosnia, I was 12. So I was like that child back at home, like waiting for parents to come from the war lines, like and see how it will look like. And so my feelings about that are mixed in one sense, because I experienced things that I saw in the war, and in that moment I didn't understand it. I couldn't cope. I said, like, I see that alcohol is present and stuff like that, but now when the time passed, I can clearly see what was happening. That huge amounts of alcohol and different kind of drugs, I mean, cigarettes, whatever, were given to soldiers as the way of their, like, how to say, salaries or payments during the war. Because after the time passed, like for first couple of months, I believe it was like everybody were scared, but as the war was like going through, like it was harder and harder to motivate these soldiers. So they were receiving as a part of their salary alcohol. And that, in that sense, like immediately when it comes back to home, reflect on the families, because it was in that time we were taught not to speak about it. And that's the most dramatic part. Of course, I was not aware of it when I was like 12, 13, 14, but now I can see it. And that somehow like over the time reflected how we grow up, like as a generation. Now it's 30, this year was 30 years since war ended. And we still have that trauma, and we still have this that we don't talk about the things. That we just like push them inside and make it like if we don't talk it, it will not exist. So it's something that is very much a burden, and I think that the generations are raised by like coping. Okay, if I drink and I forget at the moment, it will disappear. So in that sense, like there is this transgenerational trauma that is brought from the war, but it's still on. And I really don't know from this perspective for how long it will goes. And that I can say that it's like it's visible, I would say, on all sides. So it's not like on one side of the several sides in the wars exist, but all sides use the same patterns or use the same techniques.
Yeah. And you see it among the youth that you meet today at SEM as well.
Yeah. I mean, the youth have, especially young men, have problems to open up, to freely speak, to freely participate. That something like that is seen as a, pardon me for saying this, but girlish thing. I mean, it's not like that young man, age of 18, 19, will go and speak about the feelings. But in SEM, we try to that become a normal. That SEM is a safe space where people can speak and talk about different things.
Thank you, Annette. You have been working in several countries around the world, and you have written about one very interesting article where I found and got in contact with you when I wrote the report, and that was about the situation in Ukraine. And you wrote in the article about the perception of masculinity in Ukraine and how that explains or plays a central role in how soldiers deal with their trauma when they return home. and often through self-medication on alcohol and what effects that gives. Can you give us a picture of the situation that you met when you worked in Ukraine, and how, if possible, we can change these quite deep-rooted norms on masculinity that also affects the family?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Well, one of the reasons why I wrote that article was because I thought the focus was so much on the conflict itself and not on the wider impact it had on the society. So I worked in Kosovo. No, sorry, because you were sitting next to me. I worked in Ukraine in 2016, so when the conflict was just in the east. And it was quite remarkable of the impact the conflict had on the wider society, in particular when the soldiers came back from the front. Basically, they took the train to the conflict area and then the train back. And of course, when they came back, they had these traumas. They still had their weapons. So every time the soldiers demobilized, the telephone calls to the women's hotline just spiked like this. And of course, I recognize a lot what you said about the society and the tradition of not speaking about their emotions, such as also the tradition in Ukraine. The man has a very strong male norm to fulfill as basically the provider for the family. And already before the conflict, when the economy went down, the level of alcoholism increased a lot. Of course, with the conflict, it increased even more. And there was no preparation whatsoever to deal with these soldiers and their trauma. And here, of course, the male norm is also exacerbated by the legacy of the communist era, where psychologists were used for basically brainwashing. So it was also not only that male norm that you're not supposed to be weak or talk about your problems, but also distrust to psychologists and that whole spectrum. And this, of course, had a huge impact on the whole society. And one of my strongest memories was when I was working for UNICEF, and we were working with NGOs to help them to set up child-friendly spaces. And one thing you look at is always what life skills do children need, because that depends on, of course, between countries and contexts. And it was the first time that somebody from the audience said they need to learn how to deal with drunk people. And they were implying the parents. Because it's not only a male problem, it's also a lot of alcoholism among women. Because of that, exactly that tradition that you talked about. You don't talk about your problems. You have also distrust to psychologists. And another thing that struck me was when I did trainings on child protection in emergencies, the impact on children and of emergencies and what support they need. When they talked about parents, they only mentioned the mother, only the mother. It was like almost the father didn't exist. And after a while, I got so provoked. So I had to say that, coming from a nation of very proud and engaged fathers, I feel a need to say that the father is also important. Oh, yeah, of course. And then they realized that. But it was very clear that the man is basically only seen in one role as the provider. And when that role is taken back, it's like he doesn't have a role any longer in the family. So, of course, if we want to challenge this, we have to challenge that entire norm. And I think one of the first thing is to engage fathers in families and emphasize for them as well what important role they have for their children. And then, of course, changing that whole mentality of not speaking about problems. And here, I actually saw an opportunity with the conflict, because especially with the children, we could start talking about mental health and psychosocial support in a new way, and making it and raising those aspects in a new way, and making it clear for society of the importance of psychological support and psychosocial support. And that you can build on then to change that whole culture of not talking about issues, and thereby changing that culture, also diminishing the need for self-medication through alcohol and other drugs.
Now, you have been working in several countries. Have you seen these kind of norms or patterns in other countries you've worked with as well? Like
Absolutely, absolutely. And not only, of course, it doesn't start post-conflict, as you said, it starts already during the conflict. When I worked in Rwanda, for example, I came in after the genocide, and every time you talked about the genocide and the genocide there, the people who were perpetrating it, they were often drunk or high on other kind of drugs, but mostly alcohol. So it's very clear that you need alcohol or some kind of drugs to be able to do those horrific acts. Likewise, when I worked in Kosovo, I was taking statements during the NATO bombings. We were evacuated through Kosovo. I was sitting in the refugee camps taking statements from the people who came out. And one thing that was very striking was the longer the conflict went out, the more we got reports that the Serb paramilitaries that were doing these crimes, there were more and more reports of how they were drunk or affected by other drugs the longer the conflict happened.
And that's something that we see from many countries, and also historically, of course. There's a reason that people got paid as soldiers also in alcohol or liquor. Åsa, you have also worked in different international areas and humanitarian aid areas in war zones and post-conflict situations and among refugees. Now, as the Secretary General for an organization that really defends and strengthens children's rights, can you give us a picture of how you see that alcohol and other drugs are affecting children in the international cooperation? What consequences do you see in your work when it comes to children's rights?
Well, thank you very much. And you gave an example yourself from Save the Children's work in the world. And we are present in 120 countries still. I say still because we're all suffering from the changes in international cooperation. But we do, and we are present in in the most difficult humanitarian settings. And children are obviously affected in many different ways. The way we see it, violence against children, where there is violence, it is likely that the father is violent towards the mother, and then mothers and fathers can be violent towards the children. The root cause for men's violence against women is not alcohol in itself. It is misogyny and patriarchy and certain men's ideas about the fact that they have power over women and can use violence. It's okay to use violence against women when they decide so. But alcohol certainly moves boundaries and makes the violence, makes children and women much more exposed to violence. It increases in terms of frequency, brutality, and so on. And we see that also in obviously humanitarian settings, whether it's alcohol or drugs. I think also an important issue right now in Ukraine is the so-called veterans issue, where men come back from the front with injuries and traumas and everything. They have defended their country. They've seen terrible things, have had terrible experiences. And I think it's really important that we all engage in this and understand that these men have the right to be supported mentally and with whatever they need. They might also be in physical pain, of course, but also to understand the fact that women and children around them have the right to live in non-violent and safe environments, also when the father or the brother or whoever it is returns. I think that in many countries nowadays we see a lot of understanding of the fact that you can both be a war hero, so to speak, but still need support in order not to harm others. But sometimes we also hear that women and children should do some kind of training, so, not to provoke the returning father or brother or whatever it is, which is, of course, not an ideology that we should support. It is really important to understand this complexity. We also see now in Ukraine, as you know, that more and more children are orphaned in different ways, since a lot of men, unfortunately, die as a consequence of the war, killed in the war. If they have maybe a mother who is an absent parent, perhaps she has drug abuse or alcohol abuse that is increasing, sometimes due to the war. More and more children need new families to turn to, and that is something that Save the Children also works with. And then obviously it's really important to see to it that these families are safe. I actually myself grew up with in a household in a peaceful country with two highly educated parents, but my father drank far too much. It was cocktails and wine, like in nice glasses and all of that, and he was really happy when he drank, so we had no problem with that, we thought. But the day after, he was a totally different person. He was very warm and fun and nice to be around when he drank, but the day after, he was not, and he was very scary, not physically violent, but I think nowadays he would call it abuse. So I think that the kind of the consequences of drinking in an environment where children cannot choose to be there or not be there are pretty bad, even in peaceful times, and obviously during war and with all the hardship, poverty, bombardment at night, maybe starvation or lack of food, lack of protection, all of that obviously is very, very harmful to children.
And you point out that this is something universal, of course, that happens to children all over the world.
Yeah.
But when it happens in countries where you have poverty, when you don't have this social network that could help out, others that could help out, then you're even more, then it's even more difficult for the children.
And I think, as you pointed out, that if you don't talk either about the fact that men have feelings, emotions, have gone through difficult things, you might also not talk about their responsibility towards the rest of their partners and their children. That silence, I think, is also really harmful. So, yeah.
You both point out, yes, Adi.
Is it okay if I just add 2 sentences?
Do so, and then I have a questions for you. But
Okay.
start.
No, I just was wondering from this, like what two of you said, I just want to emphasize from my point of view that the real issue comes after the shooting is done. After the war silence, this like we end up with, especially I see similarities from Bosnia and Ukraine, where obviously the war will stop and the situation after political situation will not be clear. Nobody will be happy. So you end up with the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of soldiers who are not happy with how the war ended, obviously, and then they will not have a support from the government. At least that's our case. So they are so much dependent on this social network that would come either from their families or either from civil society. So it's very, very important that this after the shooting stops, that then the real work starts.
And it's, if I may, it's not only the trauma from the conflict. I remember my colleagues whose husbands came back from the conflict. Their husbands sometimes said, "I can't go back to a normal work. How can I go back to an office job after I've been out at the front with all this adrenaline and so forth?" So it's not only the trauma itself, but also this trying to go back to a normal life after being out on the fronts like that, front lines.
The help to recover,
to
go back to society, to go back to family.
But also, sorry, I know you want to ask a question, but I think also the proliferation of weapons and handguns in combination with toxic masculinities and high levels of alcohol abuse, that's really scary. Yeah.
As well, yes.
We know femicides increase in those settings, for example. Yeah.
Now, Addis, you mentioned a little bit that we need to make a change. We need to see these issues. And Sam, you work with prevention and you work to develop opportunities for young people. That's the aim of your organization. So what methods do you see as the most effective to empower young people and not least then young men to choose coping strategies other than alcohol? How can you as a civil society, or how can we as civil society sort of make sure that these youth don't inherit the trauma or inherit the behavior of coping with this trauma through alcohol or other drugs?
Yeah. I would say that in my case, in case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, that the burden of dealing with this trauma end up on a side of civil society. So we as a civil society are the one who are dealing that, because government in this scenario have like much more important things to do, like unemployment, whatever political background. So we develop different kind of programs, but I believe from our side that inclusion and safe environment is more key thing for these young people to come, that they have a place where they will feel safe. And it's like, maybe I will go like what was like in the 80s and 90s with youth clubs and the social spaces where people just can come and hang around. That's like really important for the beginning. But after that is that these I would say youth, not just young men, but young girls as well, they are just included in activities that are like based on volunteerism, activism, leadership, that they have some training in leadership, just in a case that they have somewhere where they will express, because all their emotions from the war trauma and from their parents at that time, I'm just saying they were suppressed by their parents, and we somehow need to let them out. They have to be spoken. They have to find a way how they will achieve themselves. So in CEM we have like several different methods like that we use, and we are not just educational. Okay, we will do the trainings, but we use also theater. We use the sport activities. We use also like support for like a startup of small businesses, in order that they achieve themselves, that they accomplish themselves, in order to be like free again.
And if you ever visit Travnik, you'll see the house, because it's a fantastic house in the middle of the square. It looks like the town hall of Travnik, and that's the youth house, and it makes you just so happy to come there, which I've had the opportunity to do. Well, now I'm turning to you as an audience, because I'd like you to take just a short minute to reflect on what we have been talking about so far. So if you just take a minute and talk to the person sitting next to you. Now, we've been talking about the situation. Is it something that you had thought of before? Have you noticed it or seen it in your own work? And also referring to what Addis said, that civil society play a major and important role in this work, in this field. How are you working? How could we work together to highlight these issues? So just take a minute and talk to the one sitting next to you. And if you have any questions, just remind you that you're very welcome to put your questions through the Mentimeter, and the QR code is there. Okay, so the audience is now just having a minute talking to each other to reflect on these issues. But we also have some interesting questions, and that's why I look at my mobile phone now, because I get the questions to the phone. I'll turn to you, Annette. What other coping mechanisms do you see in countries or cultures that do not consume alcohol? This could be a question for Addis as well, coming from a country that have a major Muslim population as well. Do you have any reflections on that question? Or do you want to start at this?
Yeah, but like country as Bosnia is not really good example of how Muslims do not drink. I mean, comparing to the Middle East, because alcohol is very much present, and it's very commonly used about majority. Of course, there's people who do practice Islam, and they will not do it, but quite a big number. It's just Muslims by birth, and they grew up, or so they use the alcohol quite often, and it's it's not so, like, I would say, good example of I would not say Muslim country, but where the Muslims live, that the alcohol is not used.
There's still alcohol present.
Yes, alcohol is.
Maybe
In other
I can,
countries,
I can, since I just worked in Afghanistan, where it's very difficult to get a hold of alcohol, and that triggered, of course, I was thinking about what coping mechanism are they using there? Well, religion, of course, is one, a very strong one. Praying together, but also families. And it's interesting now when I just talked about how absent the fathers were in Ukraine, and actually in Afghanistan the father is much more engaged in the family and plays a big role. And my impression is not only as providers and so forth, but also as guiders of their families. We often just hear about all these negative aspects of Afghanistan and the Taliban's and these conservative cultures. But there is also a positive side to it, where fathers were very supportive of their families, of their daughters. And my impression was that in these difficult times, you withdraw very much within the families, but the families are quite large, and you support each other when it was still allowed. They did a lot of picnics and so forth. So those kind of coping mechanisms I saw there, and also a lot of solidarity among men and women. Not, the men and women who are not related cannot engage, but men, they did their thing. They went out to restaurants and so forth, and the women, they gathered in the houses. When they couldn't move around, they had WhatsApp groups that supported each other. So a lot of positive coping mechanisms as such, actually.
Great, and that we can learn of course. And also, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, no. I when you said coping mechanisms, I thought from the perspective of the children or the women, but so I think that in conservative communities, there might not be alcohol, although, as you say, sometimes there is as well. There might be other drugs, but I think it's very important for us, an organization like ours, we are a big player and we are present in many of these settings. So we need to find ways to gain trust from children and from the families, so that they can come and talk without feeling illoyal or breaking that family loyalty that exists. And I remember from my own case, I felt very illoyal, so I never told anyone, for example, because I felt it would be the wrong thing to do. So I think it's important for us that we understand the context and that we can provide support with child psychologists or women's rights experts or what have you, that can approach these problems in a non-harmful but efficient way in terms of protection.
Others?
I would like just to add, like one of the way of mechanisms how to cope with is also in those communities to work with religious communities, because in this case, like church or mosque or whoever have a very influential status there. So it's very it goes long way if you cope with imam or priest there. So you can achieve a lot through this partnership. Regularly in this, you would not, go for it, but in these kind of societies, these kind of partnerships are needed, or cooperations for a benefit. It's just finding the right person to do it. It's a key thing.
The person that you trust, and
Yeah, because out of even this religious community, you have people who are hardcore or like very open-minded, very like, so you have to find the right person to cooperate and then send the message.
Credible messenger, you can
Yes.
say. Yeah. Also, you also work with children in Sweden from the Save the Children, and Sweden and children who might have experienced war and conflicts themselves, or who have parents who have experienced the same, who has come to Sweden. So how can we raise awareness of these issues and the importance of prevention, and to see this possibility of both when it comes to trauma, but also how alcohol and other drugs are used and can be used as coping methods? How can we sort of raise awareness in Sweden about these issues?
Yeah, I think it is very important to point out, and especially in a political climate where migration has become a hot political issue for bad reasons from my point of view. And I think it's very important to describe the background of many of people who seek refuge in Sweden, and what they might have experienced, or better even, to create platforms where those can tell who want to tell. From Save the Children's point of view, we have different ways of approaching children. It can be before school programs, like breakfast programs. It can be after school programs. It can be through our child psychologists. It's in our work in the poorest areas. It is through surveys with children themselves, where they point out what they think is most important. So I think, again, it's to be present and to not be intrusive, but caring and being knowledgeable about methods that are actually helpful, not harmful, and based on evidence and empathy. And that's what we should be doing. And yeah.
When I wrote this report, I also made interviews with psychologists working with trauma, and they said that we're quite good in receiving people to Sweden when it comes to all the practical things, but we don't see what they carry with them when it comes to trauma, and what the children inherit when it comes to generational trauma, and how that can affect their way of, possibility of going to school, or mental health and so on. So that's an important part. Now I have a question for all of you, maybe. In 2008, the WHO and the UNDP, they produced a manual for civil society organizations and humanitarian organizations, how they can work with the consequences of alcohol in conflicts and post-conflict situations. Now, very few organizations seem to have used this. And what is your view of this? Why do these issues still rank so low on the agenda internationally, even though we know that the consequences are quite wide and broad? Someone who wants to start. Why is it silent around these issues?
Maybe I can say that I think that one of the reasons is that because it's really low on a national level agenda. So when it comes to this report, and when you try to fit it in your national context, you will see that either government or the donors or whoever, this is not on their agenda. So that's, I believe that very rare organizations are just finding the way to cope with this, even though that there is a quite need, because all the other stuff somehow end up being more important. So that's just my experience. I'm speaking about like Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also Balkan context, like Western Balkans region, that like somehow this is like, if you speak like wherever you go on a national conference, this topic, it's very rare, it's very uncomfortable, it's not very popular. So and it's like somehow it's end up very low as a priority also for the local organization, or maybe some of the international organizations that are still present in the area.
But is there also a lack of knowledge between the links? Because you mentioned that your government is more focused on unemployment, but of course there are very links here between the veterans, the families' health, and unemployment as well. So do you think that there is a lack of knowledge on how alcohol and other drugs are also linked to other societal issues?
Absolutely. I mean, this is like one of the cases, lack of knowledge and lack of people know that the prevention even exists, and this is the cross-cutting element that we found it also speaking from the Bosnian perspective, but also from Ukraine perspective, that over 90% of young people don't know that these programs exist, or they will not refer to any of those programs in their own countries, and that's the fact from the ground.
Okay.
This topic is hugely unpopular, but very much present, and it's probably if we go back what I said at the beginning, we somehow we are taught not to speak about it, and I think this is just a reflection on even in this kind of setting.
Stigma around.
Yes, stigma, community stigma, not individual stigma, but now we also probably developed the whole society stigma around this topic.
I also think that if we look at it from the international organizations and the UN agencies' point of view, it has very little cross-border perspective. So if you compare to how much money, for example, that goes into fighting drugs, in Afghanistan, for example, UNODC had huge programs of preventing poppy cultivation and so forth. But of course, that's driven very much also from the fact that will eventually affect also other countries, the donor countries themselves. So that's why, from that perspective, that's so much more attractive for donors than alcohol that is very contained within a community or a country, and maybe doesn't really have so much effects on the outside.
Or even might have a positive effect economically, since it's a lot of global companies coming into these countries that actually...
And legal. Which is the difference from poppy cultivation, for example.
Of course it is, yeah.
Yeah, I used to work in Bolivia. That's a cocaine-producing or coca leaf-producing country. So I agree with that. But I think also in humanitarian issues, I'm guessing now, but it is probably also because of the complexity in these issues and the different levels of problems that are there, and the lack of funding many times. I think it's more so within the UN system, you often kind of push it then to the agency in charge, WHO maybe, or UNODC and so on, and the others are pure humanitarians. I think that it's getting better, but I think that it's something there that has to do with it. And maybe also the fact that some of these drugs are legal, alcohol obviously, but also marijuana. While I was based in New York from 2018 to 23, and during that time New York legalized marijuana. And when I think back about New York, that the smell of weed is one of the characteristics for me, walking in the street, going home or wherever. And so I think that it's something perhaps there that it can't be so bad if it's, it's for all of us, although many people have much deeper knowledge, obviously, also. But I think it's the complexity and kind of hierarchy of needs, in a way, plays in.
And the child rights perspective is really needed when we're talking about these issues, of course.
Yeah, I don't think it's very prominent in that agenda either, I have to say. I mean, violence, certainly, protection, for sure, but the combination and the complexities, as I said, I think it could be much more present. Yeah.
Thank you. I will have a question here before we'll end this session. So this is to you, Åsa, and I have to translate it. How can we secure that children's rights are not forgotten after peace or in a post-conflict situation, and since self-medication of alcohol and drugs is very present, how do we secure that children's rights are not forgotten?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think a very urgent one. I am also worried that my home country seems to be leaving Africa, for example, more and more in terms of international cooperation. There are many post-conflict, fragile situations there where children fare really poorly. Also, I think the access to education and schools is strangely also a bit of a forgotten issue, and we know that if schools work the way they should, that is protection in itself. So I think that I can just confirm that that's a really important issue to keep raising. And I think that right now, the, so to speak, backlash on everything that we fight for, rights, international solidarity, peace efforts, all of that, the backlash is so massive, we don't know where to start. But we have to keep fighting, as the UN Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders just said in this room this morning. There's no alternative, we just have to. That's my answer. You have to fight.
Can I add on? And one thing that we've seen really, really good results within different countries where I worked is training both for parents and teachers in children's psychology, so that they recognize when children are acting out, that comes from trauma and not that they're bad kids. And it's one of the few activities that really had immediate impact. And both parents and teachers said, oh, now I understand. I approach my children or my students in a completely different way because I understand where it comes from. And then, of course, when I know how to handle that, the child reacts to that. So that's something very concrete we can do after, in a situation like that, post-conflict.
Mm. And that should be used in Sweden as well, I think.
I think so too. We have all these preparedness activities these days. It's very much focused on keeping water at home and so forth, but that whole psychological part, the psychosocial part of resilience and strengthening resilience in society is quite missing at this point, I think.
Mm. We have a lot of focus on the children and how they act, but not why they act in the way they do.
Yeah. And who is responsible for the fact that they're acting as they are, because it doesn't come from themselves, of course. Children are very easily to manipulate. That's why it's so tempting to use children as child soldiers in conflicts all over the world. But that means that we can also influence them for the good. So it's all up to us as adults to see to that we provide children with the right context and the right support that they need to develop as good citizens.
Mm. It's the push and pull factors, and we need to be positive pull factors to make sure that children gets into a positive group or a positive setting. And that's exactly what you do at SEM, Addis. And before we wrap up, you've worked with these issues for such a long time, and you have also seen how they have affected the country you live in and the young generation growing up in Bosnia today. So what is the most important message that you think that the audience today should take away from this conversation we have had?
Probably that we have to continue investing in youth, that we have to work on education of young people, and that we believe that next generation will break the pattern of this transgenerational trauma and transgenerational stigma about this, speaking about this, and this cooperation among different stakeholders in the field to everybody help young people to go up, speak up, and to be stronger persons to be able to change it. I mean, as you said, as you quoted from the fourth session, I mean, there's no alternative. We have to like be strong. Even now, this is a challenging period where it's less and less people working in the field with face-to-face with young people. We have to turn back and start working even more. So more centers like ours, more cooperations with ours, and we have to learn from the lessons that we learn. Why you like we don't use some of the good models that we developed in Bosnia? Why don't use it in Ukraine? Because we believe that there is a huge similarity among these people. So education and believing in youth. That's my message.
Yeah. You want to add something? What shall the audience bring with them today?
Change is possible. That's mine.
Annette, do you want to add something?
I think I said what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I'd say that with this shrinking space of civil society right now globally, it's even more important to meet in this way, to learn from each other also over borders, crossing borders, and not only with learning nationally, but also internationally. So I'm very happy that the three of you were here today. Thank you for a very good discussion around this topic. And just wrapping up, I would say that what we take away today is that the consequences of war, they don't disappear just because the fight does. It often moves from the battlefield into the home and affect people around, not least women and children. But we've also heard today that possibilities it's possible to make a change, as you said, Åsa. And that requires effort in knowledge and support among humanitarian organizations, but at the same time it also needs preventive work and public health as a red thread, as a guide for political decisions. And I would like to add there as well, of course, human rights and the child rights perspective that should be leading the political decisions. So thank you all for joining us for this talk about alcohol and conflict situations and helping us to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's go.